Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week I talk with Phil Raskin, a ceramic artist and the owner of Prairie Olive. We talk about how he got started in ceramic arts, the impact art can have on others, and how his art is informed by his Judaism on this week's Who the Folk podcast. Phil Raskin, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Glad to be here in your home. I know we are above the studio of Prairie Olive Pottery. So tell me a little bit more about Prairie Olive and how it all came about.
I've been making ceramics since high school as a more concentrated effort. And, my first ceramic experience, though, was through Camp Tikva, which was a local Jewish camp. So I think I was maybe 12 or something, and they had a little ceramics program, and I got to sit at the wheel and make something. And those pieces are long gone. Maybe that set something into motion. I don't know. Where
is Camp Tikva? I'm not familiar with that one.
It was by Aiken, Minnesota.
Okay.
It was a JCC camp. So I was there from probably 1969 through 1972 or 3 or something like that. Yeah.
What was it that drew you to ceramics?
That was one of those funny stories where I kind of screwed up in reverse, where when I was in high school, I literally looked through the class list and I wanted a class that was going to have no homework, be really easy, maybe even ditch out of class occasionally, and something that maybe even was fun or sociable. And, ooh, look, pottery, that's the ticket. But then, of course, that was the first class I ever got an A in. So,
turns out maybe you were good at the blow-off class then. Might have been up your alley.
No. The school arranged for me to take a third semester, and I became the teacher's aide, and I'm still friends with that teacher today. He still lives in the area.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, he was a good guy.
How does it transition from a class you're really good at to something that became professional?
There was something about getting my hands dirty, playing in the mud that really spoke to me. And most kids, when they get out of high school, they buy a stereo, they go buy a car, they want to go on a trip. I bought a potter's wheel and a kiln. And I brought it home, and my parents looked at me and said, "You bought what? You're going to put it where?"
This was not a conversation you had with them first, I assume?
No. It was my money. I went and spent it how I saw fit. So,
fair enough.
Yeah.
How supportive were they of that, the move to this sort of endeavor?
Well, what do you call a Jewish dropout? Is someone who doesn't have their PhD, right? So, yeah, Jews and art and ceramics are typically not said in the same sentence, so they weren't exactly thrilled right away. Yeah.
And obviously there's one of the ways to continue is to, go get a college degree in something in the arts, where pottery is something in the discipline of pottery or ceramic art or something like that. Yeah. Or you could go the other route, which it sounds like is what you did, where just sort of you started
apprenticing.
Yes.
So I had a real fortunate introduction, really pretty much right after high school. There was a local woman, Jewish woman, who was a potter, first Jewish potter I ever met, and she just passed away not too long ago, Leah Rosen, and she made Judaica, and I thought those two things were pretty interesting. She introduced me to, excuse me, who I consider my mentor, and Dean Schwartz runs a pottery school out of his house, his farm in northeastern Iowa in Decorah. And the reason he was really so important is, step by step, he studied under a woman named Marguerite Wildenhain. And Marguerite was a French-born Jew who studied at the Bauhaus. She designed for industry, she designed for art, and she was able to leave Nazi Germany because she had a French passport. She came to America and settled in Northern California, where she held a school in the tradition that my teacher, Dean, followed. So from Marguerite to Dean, and then being introduced by Leah Rosen, it really set me off on a course of apprenticeship, form follows function. Something should sit equally well on the museum shelf and on the kitchen shelf.
So one of the things we talked about earlier is the idea that some people don't consider pottery to be a fine art.
Yes.
How does that advice from Dean follow? How does that work in concert with the people who don't think pottery is good enough to be considered a fine art?
There has been some evolution in art circles. Traditionally, ceramics has been considered a folk art or craft and not a fine art because it's functional. Mm-hmm. If you can use it, it's not fine art. At one point, I applied to a local college of art and design, and sitting across the table from the admissions counselor, she said to me, "Ceramics, we don't do that here. It's not art." And so then I collected my stuff and I went off and found some potters to work for.
How do you go about finding people to apprentice for?
Well, in those days, you had to either look in the...
Well, I suppose right. Now there's the internet, but before... Back then, though, how did that work?
The pottery community is fairly small even today, and it's so you get names from other people. You could literally look in the yellow pages. I was lucky in that I found a local potter who was also Jewish, Hal Robinson, and he said, "You can come over to my studio, and when you get to the point where you can make things that I can decorate and sell, I'll pay you by the piece for them." And so then I became determined, and with enough persistence, I finally started making stuff that was up to his standards, and he started paying me by the piece.
When you make your pieces now that you sell, is there a, for example, like a coffee mug? Again, just as an example, is there a certain style that you go for in the not the painting part of it, but the actual physical mug itself? Is there a certain style that you go for, you look for as you create?
So some potters have a very loose style, and they're kind of a more amorphous forms or maybe more undulating edges. My style is, I describe as much tighter, much more defined lines, much more even curve. I tend to really want things to be symmetrical.
Okay.
But again, that's a lot of that influence from Marguerite and the Bauhaus.
When you pick up a mug, you want it to be balanced. You don't want it to feel
comfortable.
Yeah, it wants to. You want it to sit right in your hand.
Every act of eating and drinking is a kind of a ritual. And the interplay, the dialogue between the user and the object becomes very personal. People have very strong attachments to their coffee mug or their cereal bowl or the plate that they put on a plate rail on the wall or something. There becomes a very interpersonal dynamic between the person and this thing that they use regularly. And that's really an important piece for me to see that,
Have you always, worked with sort of in like the traditional sort of tableware or housewares sort of space, or have you branched out beyond that?
So I've done a couple other things. At one point in 1995, I bought what was essentially a defunct company that I bought for the price of equipment. The used equipment was a handmade tile company. And I ran it for 8 years before I sold it. So we did handmade tile, we would do giftware, we got commissions for big wall mural installations. Ronald McDonald House has a big installation for a donor wall, several donor walls. Shalom Home in Reutenberg has a huge installation in the Reutenberg fireplace room.
Okay.
That's a donor wall. And a bunch of other commissions like that too. So, yeah, this was bas relief mosaic.
Wow.
In multicolors and textures and finishes and yeah.
And so you're creating the tiles and doing the painting on them.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Sculpting, decorating, glazing, painting, all of that. Yeah.
Do you do the design also, or are you working off of somebody else's vision when they say, this is the kind of thing I'm looking for, this is the kind of thing I want to see?
I just recently did a commission for a woman that I taught with at Temple Israel. And her house, her husband was an actor, and she wanted to redo a bathroom, but something kind of dedicated to him. So together we worked up an idea, and I made some, again, kind of a mosaic relief.
Okay.
And there's some drama masks, the happy and sad
Of
mask.
course.
And then we put in some kind of pillars with flowers that sort of resembled the floodlights. And there was like on the other wall was like what would be the stage. And she was just thrilled. And
awesome.
I thought it came out really well that all the pieces fit together in this little bathroom. So I work with the client, or if it's just something for me. Right now, I've got a piece downstairs that I'm working on. In Jewish art, often you'll see the two lions facing each other, and then you'll see the luchot, the tablets, in the middle, and the lions are facing or guarding the tablets. Well, I changed it. I sculpted the two lions, and then I sculpted in the middle piece is going to be a door with a crown on it.
Oh.
So it's like the luchot, the tablets are the door, and the lions are at the door. So we'll see how it comes out.
It's an interesting play on the traditional, though.
Yes.
So you mentioned that I'm going to go back a second. You had mentioned that you're the first person you apprentice for is, you'll make work that looks like mine that I can then paint and sell.
Sure.
Eventually, you took on the painting side as well of your own work. You
Yes.
do the whole bit, as you mentioned. How hard was it to learn sort of the skill of the painting piece of the creating art? Because, I mean, it all sounds terrifyingly difficult to me, but, I also have no skill when it comes to art, so.
You're an artist. You're a vocal artist.
Oh, thank you. Very kind.
The painterly side is the most difficult. It creates a lot of anxiety. I'm not really comfortable with the brush necessarily. When I look at the forms that I make, I'm almost always really happy because the control of the form on the wheel or sculpting something comes just sort of second nature. The painterly aspect, it just feels a lot more difficult. Mm-hmm. The color aspect seems pretty easy to pick the colors that I like, that I want to see in something, but it is really creating the design. But ultimately, if I just stop the internal dialogue long enough to see what the piece is telling me, then the image starts to appear, and I'm like, oh, this line here, and then I can add this line, and then create this shape on it, and yeah.
I've always said that the scariest part about being of being a writer is the blank page. at the start of an article, not knowing what to write, or even if you've interviewed people, you know the topic, you know the area, you still have to put it coherent onto a page.
Sure.
You have that twice. Once the big, the lump of clay sitting on the wheel before you get into it.
Yeah.
And then once you've completed the form and thinking of color scheme and how you want it to come out in the end, you've got to do that twice. How do you push past that?
A good cup of tea, a little bit of sweat, and be willing to stand up and walk away for a minute.
Same.
like any good negotiation,
Yeah,
be willing to
absolutely.
get up and walk away for a minute. So
No, absolutely. That makes all the sense in the world. Absolutely. So when the tile, when you sold the handmade tile business, what was your next step after that? Obviously, that was quite a number of years ago. So how do you sort of move on to a different stage after that point?
So the skills as a pot. So I often joke that when I was a potter, I was poor, and I couldn't afford to hire people to fix the house or fix the car or do any kind of mechanical stuff or anything, and so I had to learn how to do it. And I had some good teachers in my family for that kind of thing. So after I sold the tile company, I started fixing houses and do handyman or put in floors or fix walls or set tile or something like that. And
Okay.
yeah, it's been a good living.
But you're transitioning back to the
Making
world
ceramics.
of ceramics.
Yeah, the joke is that you put enough miles on the vehicle and the check engine light comes on. So about 4 years ago, I kind of had to stop and look at my life and say, what do I really want to do? And so I had all this experience in ceramics and I really enjoyed it. So I set up a studio in the basement once again.
Except it's your own basement this time.
This time, it's not my parents' basement anymore.
But it was like riding a bike, the old adage of you just hop back on and it all came together.
It really was. I at one point before I sold the tile company, I figured I'd made at least 100,000 pieces on the wheel.
Okay.
Minimum. So the muscle memory is definitely still there.
That's amazing. The skill, it doesn't go. The skills just don't go away.
Doesn't go away. No, there's an initiative that the parks do and some other nonprofits called it's like something bowls where potters make bowls and then they sell them and they raise money for.
Yeah, I know the Robbinsdale School District, the Hopkins School District, so participate in those.
So there was about a dozen years from the last time I threw a pot till I went over to the park one day when they were making bowls, and I sat down at the wheel and started making bowls with a dozen years between, and boom, they just flew off the wheel like a day had passed. So
it's got to feel good.
It was great.
What was there, like a sense of relief, a sense of calm? Like what, from a mindset perspective, what happens to you? Like that first time it comes off the wheel, 12 years gone by, and it's like, oh yeah, I still got it.
I'm just glad to still be alive. I don't know how to quantify that. It was it was a good day. Yeah, I mean, it was not long after I'd gotten married, and my wife, she saw some of the pots around the house, but she'd never seen me throw on the wheel, and so she was with me one of those days, and she's like, "Wow, that's kind of cool."
It's like, you got some game.
Hopefully, we'll see.
What's the significance of the name Prairie Olive?
So Prairie is this prairie we live on.
Okay.
And olive refers to like Mount of Olives or the Olive of Jerusalem.
Okay.
And pretty much through history, the Jews have gone everywhere, and the Jews bring their culture to wherever they live, and wherever they're living influences the Jews at the time. So here I am, 21st century Jew living on the prairie, Prairie Olive.
Awesome. So the Judaic art that you make, the olive side of Prairie Olive, how
Yep.
did some of the ideas for the types of pieces you make come together?
So there's kind of a multi-part to this. Before I mentioned Leah Rosen, and
Yeah.
she made Judaica, and that always kind of inspired me, but it wasn't something that I really chased after right away. And then as I started working full time making pots, the thought in the back of my head kept coming up, and so I made one Kiddush cup, and I had a booth at the Upstate New York Renaissance Festival, and the Kiddush cup was kind of up on a higher shelf, and one day this elderly couple come in, and the man reaches up to take the cup off the shelf, and I can see the tattoo on his forearm of his number from being in the camp. And I'm floored to watch this old man who had been in the camps looking at my Kiddush cup. And after that day, I said to myself, I really want to do more of this. I want to be able to be a Jewish artist.
How does that come together, the Jewish side and your art side? How does that manifest itself?
I have a pretty intrinsic Jewish identity. There isn't a part of me that's not Jewish.
Okay.
So whatever I do, I come to with a Jewish perspective. I taught Sunday school at Temple Israel for 20 some years. I taught afternoon school at some of the other temples for another handful of years. I'm not extremely observant, but I'm conscious of my Jewishness every day. So when I make pots, it's got to be part of my Jewish identity, because the Jewish identity is so much a part of me. Mm-hmm. And as I started making more and more Judaica, it became more and more rewarding. People were saying, oh, I want names and dates for so-and-so's wedding, or I want a Kiddush cup for this B'nai Mitzvah, or I want a Seder plate with these images on it, or I want... or Shalom Home comes to me and says, we want a donor wall in Reutenberg. And this Jewish identity becomes part of the work. A quick story that was one of the probably most meaningful moments of the pottery career and Jewish identity is I'm at an art fair, not in the Twin Cities, somewhere on the road, and a young woman, 13, 14 years old, comes in, and she stands and looks around for a little longer than most people would stand and look at a pottery booth. And she's looking at my Judaica, and she tips her head side to side, and she finally comes over and she buys a mezuzah cover or a Kiddush cup, I don't remember even now. And she says to me, my grandparents were Jewish and my parents were Jewish, but nobody's ever really taught me anything about this. That's really all I know. And so this is going to be the beginning of my Jewish education. And I'm floored. I don't know what to say. I'm a little verklempt right now, even just to remember the story, and I can still picture her in my mind and seeing how she was so curious and so intrigued. And it just makes you feel like you almost have some significance in this world when something like that happens.
I mean, you have this unbelievable example of the power of art and of Judaica all in one. Like if the art isn't good, if the pottery is, so to look at, she's probably not stopping it.
Thank you.
Or she's certainly not standing 15 minutes, looking at the Kiddush Cup and mezuzah cover, right? I mean, she's probably moved on. I think it says something about both, and I think that's such a great metaphor of just the impact of art and the impact art can have on people.
There's not a lot of Jewish potters out there. There's a few.
Mm-hmm.
There's even fewer potters who make Judaica. So, yeah, it's a small club.
So you mentioned the upstate New York, the Renaissance Fair. Do you do a lot of art fairs? Is there an art fair circuit that or at least you used to be on?
Well, as they say back in the day, I would do art fairs May through September from Cleveland to Omaha. And, we had so much fun. I would schedule shows with other artists that I was friends with, and we would stay at the same hotels, and we'd have the dumb customer question of the day contest, and just had a lot of fun. Yeah.
What's an example of a dumb question you'd get from a customer?
Here's a great one. Someone walked into the booth, looked at my Judaica, and said, "Do you speak English?"
Okay, that's all right, that's one way of doing things.
Another one that I would always win with was somebody would come in and ask if they'd pick up a cup and say, "Can I use this?" And I would drink my coffee out of my mug that looked the same as that one and say, "Yeah, I think so."
There's some context clues that people could get from their surroundings, maybe if they looked a bit. Getting back into the art fair circuit, is that an easy thing to get back into as you're coming back into the world of ceramics?
The jury process is much more competitive now.
Okay.
Everything's online. You really have to up your game in terms of photos and your booth setup, and it's a lot more difficult now.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's a good thing.
Good. That's good. So, as you're trying to get yourself into some art fairs for this season, where can people find your work right now?
They can certainly come to the website prairieolive.com, and there is a link for Etsy there,
Okay.
which doesn't have a lot of inventory in it right now. Because I'm saving up the inventory, so if I do get into some art fairs this summer, I do have an application in at a few art fairs. Last year, I did the St. Louis Park Rec Center art fair in September, so I'm hoping I'll get in again this year. That was the first art fair I've done in 20 years.
How'd it feel to be back out there?
Exhilarating, scary, exciting, lovely.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Last couple questions, and we'll let you get back to work in the studio.
Sure.
First, what is your favorite Jewish holiday?
Yes. So I really have to say two.
Oh, you and everybody else I ask, but go ahead.
All right. The first one would be Pesach, because we get to be grateful. We get together with the people who are important in our life, and people come from all over. We get to set this table, and we're fortunate to have the food and the company and the place to do this. One of the traditions that is really fun, the family that I normally spend Passover with, they pose during the Seder an ethical dilemma discussion. And they pick a different one every year, and it creates some lively conversations.
That's awesome. That's such a interesting way to put a spin on what is, the traditional holiday.
But I think it's a distinctly historically Jewish perspective in that we want to ask the question. The question itself has power, has meaning. To say, well, if this, then what? What are we going to do? If not now, when?
Yeah.
If not me, who?
And the questioning of things is so very Jewish.
Yes. Yeah. 2 Jews and 3 opinions.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah. And then the second favorite holiday, strangely enough, is also in some ways the most difficult, is Yom Kippur. Yeah. Yom Kippur, because you have to take this moment to stop and look inside and say, who am I?
Yeah.
What am I doing on this planet? Whose life do I help, and whose life can I help more? Who is my community? Who is my family? What is this body I live in? And those are the questions that, for me, give significance to this life.
Excellent. And what is your favorite Jewish food?
Well, that's even harder to answer.
We save the really tough ones for the end.
That really is the hardest one. It's got to be my mom's kugel. I mean, she's been gone a dozen years now, but when she would make her sweet kugel,
yeah,
ambrosia.
She leave the recipe to you?
No, I don't have it anymore. No, I wish. I kind of know. I kind of remember what it is, but yeah.
Even if you had it, it wouldn't quite be the same.
It would never be the same as when you're, Shabbat is coming and mom's got the kugel in the oven and it comes out and it's crispy and it's sweet and
the smell takes over the house.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing like it.
I don't know. Well, Phil Raskin, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, and hopefully we'll see you on the Art Fair circuit this year.
I hope so too. Thank you, Lonnie.
The Who the Folk podcast is part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network, a product of Jew Folk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.